Startup Stock Exchange presents SSX EDU Interviews. How did you get into startup investing?
Well, it really started back in the early 1980s when I joined a startup myself. The first startup I was involved with was called Exim International. We were an export trading company. And then I joined American General Medical Corporation, which we were a startup that built cardiac cath labs and critical care units around the world. At that time, there was a hospital building boom, and we became basically a subcontractor. When somebody else was building a whole hospital, they would contract to us to build the cardiac cath lab and the critical care unit. And then after a while, the construction started slowing down, so we got involved with the management and the supply to those same units, the cardiac cath labs and critical care units. So my first forte was just on the other side, raising capital for those companies, and I didn't have any money to invest at that time. I was in my early 20s, but luckily we were successful with those businesses, and shortly thereafter, I did become an investor.
What industry developments excite you the most right now?
Well, for myself, I can't help but stay with most of the money that I invest in startups in the area that I know the best, which is cardiovascular medicine. I can't believe it, but I'm 32 years of time in the cardiovascular space, and I would recommend to people to always try to strive to invest in what they know the best, the field that they know the best. I believe that it gives you a better advantage. But outside of that, I love social good impact companies. And outside of cardiovascular, we've made a number of investments now. Leonhardt Ventures has raised $145 million, and we've put that $145 million to work in 28 different companies. And Leonhardt Ventures is both an LLC and an angel network, and that $145 million is the combination of those two. But in the social good impact space, the reason I like that space is that I really do believe that we're entering an era where doing well by doing good is going to become more the rule than the exception. And I really believe that basic fundamentals, that companies that treat people well, treat the people that their employees well, suppliers well, their community well, and have a sense of purpose, are actually going to create more innovation, which then also helps to create happier repeat customers, which then leads to more sustainable businesses over the long run. Another way of expressing that is that what I'm really against is investing in companies that have an overwhelming focus on quarterly net profits at the expense of everything else. If I see one of these CEOs come in that Wall Street seems to love, but I absolutely deplore, it is when they are cutting R&D, cutting salaries of people, cutting plants, moving production offshore, and they get a temporary boost in net profits, and somehow these Wall Street analysts think, wow, that's great, just what we needed, the discipline in that company. But just about everybody who's working in a company like that realizes that that CEO is selling the future in order to get a temporary boost in short-term profits. So that's what I do not invest in, and what I do invest in is companies that look for the long term.
Is there a common theme across your investments?
It really is the combination of myself investing in what I know, the cardiovascular space, and then this new movement to try to find the best opportunities in social good. And our definition of social good is broad. It does, and we certainly believe in conscious capitalism, which is not just social good, but social good that's also a solid business model. Whole Foods is a great example, or Patagonia. These are companies that do a lot of good, treat their people well, their communities well. They're not perfect, and every time I bring that up, somebody will bring up maybe some of their imperfections. They're not perfect, but they're really striving to try to be good citizens and try to do good things for society, and they're constantly working on improvement themselves. And I really believe that companies like that, and it's proven out. I was an early investor in Whole Foods 10, 15, 20 years ago, and it was only $3 or $4 a share, and now it's I think $58 a share today. My belief in them has proven out. I spotted really early that treating local farmers well and bringing fresh foods to people and treating their employees well and giving health insurance even to part-time people. Some of the others were thinking, oh, that's going to cut profits and that's terrible because they should be trying to maximize as much profit as they can. And I was a believer that that model was going to be more sustainable. And part of the model of going always for the short-term quarterly profits as your only indicator of a company's performance is it puts you on a roller coaster ride, because they'll hit those quarterly numbers 2 quarters in a row, but then when the employees are disgruntled and they're afraid and there isn't a treatment of people well, which splashes over to customer service, the business starts to erode. So I would really encourage any investor to really look hard at the innovation culture of the company, the culture of consciousness, of the sense of purpose, and really, maybe more than anything else, look at 2 things: the morale of the employees. If employees are happy, they're going to be more innovative and they're going to create happier customers. And the second thing is an innovation culture, that there has to be a culture in an organization that allows people to make mistakes, allows experiments to happen. In fact, it may sound a little bit funny, but I actually like companies that are having some failures, because if they're not having any failures, that means that they're actually being too cautious and they're not pushing the envelope and they're unlikely to have a breakthrough innovation.
What are the most important factors you look for in a potential company?
I think I touched on it a little bit earlier, but the number one thing I look for is an innovation culture. And by that, I mean that the CEO and the upper management has created a culture where they're creating a company of leaders, where and they are encouraging people to have experimentation. Experimentation is the lifeblood of innovation. Tom Peters, one of my favorite teachers, he teaches fail forward fast. So try a lot of things, keep what works, and step out of the comfort zone. We all know the story of how Apple was a computer company, but ended up being a leader in music and a leader in phones. And it's unlikely if that same move would have been brought to IBM or some of the more traditional computer companies at the time, if they would have accepted a move to music and to phones when they were a computer company. But Apple became the most valuable company on the planet. I love what Steve Jobs stood for as far as being an innovator. So innovation culture is one. The second is what I mentioned before, a culture of conscious capitalism, which basically means treating people well, treating your community well, and having a sense of purpose. And the third thing, which kind of ties into the other 2, is employee morale. I try to find ways to figure out whether those employees are excited to come to work every day, if they feel as though that they are able to contribute to innovation and improvements in their products, and that they are carrying that over to making customers really happy. So those 3 things: innovation culture, conscious capitalism culture, and employee morale.
What is the most important lesson you've learned as a startup investor?
Well, first of all, startup investing is not the easiest thing, and even the best of the best are not very good at it. It's not much different than baseball. We have our Los Angeles Dodgers here in the championship series starting today, and even the best of the best in baseball, as an example, since 1941, all of baseball has hit more successfully more than 4 out of 10 times. Williams did it back in 1941, and since then, not a single player, with I think 250,000 players have played since 1941, and not one has been able to be successful 4 out of 10 times. Some have come 3.8 out of 10 times. And it's not much different in startup investing, that inevitably you're going to have your failures. And if you succeed, it's amazing that it's kind of similar to baseball, that if you're succeeding 4 out of 10 times with startup investments, you're in the elite of the best of the best. The average person who even has a little bit of skill at it is likely to have a strong, super successful return 1 out of 10 times. So when you enter, you have to realize that failure is part of it. And that means that you really have to diversify the portfolio. You look at the electric cars as an example. People following that industry all know that Tesla has moved forward and has been a tremendous financial success. It's kind of easy to see now that it's happened, but it wasn't easy to see 10, 15 years ago when all the electric car companies were coming. There was Fisker, there was Tesla, there was maybe a half dozen others. And if at that time your ability to maybe pick Tesla out of the first 12 as being the one that was going to be the winner, it would be extremely difficult. Now, some people will say, well, I could have done it, but most likely, even the best of the best investors, there's so many variables that it's hard to get right. So I would if we were turning the clock back, I would say take allotments and pick the best 6 or 10 out of the top companies in a sector and diversify your money across that sector. And you're more likely that then, one of those 10 are going to break through. So my, big advice would be to invest in pools of companies. If you believe in the stem cell sector, if you believe in electric cars, or you believe in green energy or solar, don't just pinpoint it into one. Buy into a portfolio. Do a lot of research to figure out the best of the best. There might be 100 companies in that sector, and I would recommend not investing in all 100. I would recommend investing in the best 10 after doing research on 100.
What advice would you give a first-time investor?
Even the best of the best in baseball, as an example, since 1941, all of baseball has hit more successfully more than 4 out of 10 times. Williams did it back in 1941, and since then, not a single player, with I think 250,000 players have played since 1941, and not one has been able to be successful 4 out of 10 times. Some have come 3.8 out of 10 times. And it's not much different in startup investing, that inevitably you're going to have your failures. And if you succeed, it's amazing that it's kind of similar to baseball, that if you're succeeding 4 out of 10 times with startup investments, you're in the elite of the best of the best. The average person who even has a little bit of skill at it is likely to have a strong, super successful return 1 out of 10 times. So when you enter, you have to realize that failure is part of it. And that means that you really have to diversify the portfolio. You look at the electric cars as an example. People following that industry all know that Tesla has moved forward and has been a tremendous financial success. It's kind of easy to see now that it's happened, but it wasn't easy to see 10, 15 years ago when all the electric car companies were coming. There was Fisker, there was Tesla, there was maybe a half dozen others. And if at that time your ability to maybe pick Tesla out of the first 12 as being the one that was going to be the winner, it would be extremely difficult. Now, some people will say, well, I could have done it, but most likely, even the best of the best investors, there's so many variables that it's hard to get right. So I would if we were turning the clock back, I would say take allotments and pick the best 6 or 10 out of the top companies in a sector and diversify your money across that sector. And you're more likely that then, one of those 10 are going to break through. So my, big advice would be to invest in pools of companies. If you believe in the stem cell sector, if you believe in electric cars, or you believe in green energy or solar, don't just pinpoint it into one. Buy into a portfolio. Do a lot of research to figure out the best of the best. There might be 100 companies in that sector, and I would recommend not investing in all 100. I would recommend investing in the best 10 after doing research on 100.
That's some great advice. Now you've been, investing and in business for quite a while, over 30 years, but we have a lot of first-time investors on the Startup Stock Exchange. And so is there one piece that's the most important piece of advice that you could give them, or is it more of a broad look at how investing works, but speak to your younger self, but placed in this time?
Well, where I've had the most success is where I've invested in the people. We invested in a restaurant chain, and when I first did that, my accountant was saying, don't do it. All my clients invest in restaurants and they lose their money, and you shouldn't do it. But Paul Nunez, who was president of the restaurant company, he just had something in him that made me want to believe in him, and he was a hard worker. And I made that investment against my financial advisor's advice. and it turned out great. I ended up with 500% return on that investment, and it really was because it all comes down to people. I mean, companies are people, they're led by people, and if you get a super hardworking, energized, focused person who isn't going to accept failure at the helm of a company, it really increases the chance of success. And I took time to get to know him before I made the investment. So I would provide that advice, is that find a way. Maybe it isn't optimal to go meet a CEO in person, but you can do research, especially with Google and the internet. I would extensively spend the time researching the character and the work ethic and the capabilities of not only the CEO, but really the whole founding management team, the board of advisors, and the board of directors. Because that's another thing that I look for, is that even if you have a hard-working CEO, if he's surrounded by a solid board of directors and a solid board of advisors, he or she, I should say, there is a much higher likelihood of success. And I do want to, before I go, I do want to talk about women entrepreneurs if there's a chance to do that.
What has been your proudest moment as an investor?
Is really something special. And then, being an inventor and developer of products for heart disease, my most special moment that is being in a waiting room where I'm walking with the doctor into the waiting room, and the wife and the daughter of the patient are very worried that their husband and their father may have been lost in the surgery, and we're coming out to tell them that his aortic aneurysm has been sealed, and his blood pressure has returned, and his aortic tear that was causing bleeding into his chest has been sealed, and he is completely fixed and going to be fine and going to be with you in a few hours. And when you see the thank you that comes from that kind of experience, and that all started with investment. We wouldn't have been able to develop that life-saving device if the early investors didn't believe in us and give us the money to be able to test it out. And at the beginning, that data isn't there. That's the thing, is that never does anyone start with the perfect data that absolutely proves 100% that the product is perfect. There has to be people at the beginning of that process that have faith in the management, have faith in the idea, that kind of become part of it. And that's the neat thing about investing in an early stage company, is that you really have the right to take pride in that experience. So when we saved that life of that gentleman, and we heard the thank you from their daughter, the most sincere thank you that you could possibly receive on planet Earth, that you just saved my father, you just saved my husband, and thank you. That thank you is extended to everybody, to the people working on the factory floor, the people who invested in the company, and the fact that we get a financial positive return from that experience. That's a byproduct of what really is the underlying thing that's happening, is that people believed in doing something, people rallied together to do it, and then succeed in doing it. And it's the central purpose. Our organization's central purpose was to find a better way of repairing aortic aneurysms to save people's lives like that. And the financial reward was a byproduct. And so the people who invest with the understanding that you're becoming part of something special when you make that investment, that's going to be a more healthy experience of investment. It's also going to be, the experience that allows somebody to have that feeling that I had, and then once you have it, you're kind of hooked. Like you don't want, then things that are less important are not as interesting to you, and you really want to come back and repeat that experience because it's so rewarding.
Tell us a horror story from your investing experience.
Well, of course, we have our difficulties and horror stories, and the biggest mistake that I've basically made in my career, or we made together as a team, is with the BioHeart, a company that uses stem cells to regenerate damaged heart muscle. In 2008, we did an IPO successfully, and after we did the IPO, we decided we were going to focus all the money just on the clinical trials, and we were going to stop going to heart conferences. We were going to stop supporting journals. We were going to stop hosting scientific and physician advisory board meetings as we had done in the past. And we were basically going to be kind of quiet in stealth mode and quietly just do clinical trials. I didn't realize at the time that when you stop marketing and you stop going out and meeting people and you're out of the circuit of being able to communicate, how quickly support erodes. And support eroding when you're a public company means your stock price goes down. And so the idea of being quiet and not going to meetings where your customers and supporters are going to be was a mistake. And I wish I could go back and have another chance to make that decision, but it was, quite a lesson. So when you invest in a company, I guess, if you're not involved with the management, look to see that they're dedicating a proper amount of money to go to the conferences and trade shows that are, and look at how they're managing those trade shows. Because even if you have the greatest product in the world, if you don't get out and build support for it, it's kind of like if you were running for political office and you would think that you would just put out one press release and you're going to be elected governor or president. We all know that it's a campaign. You have to build support. Even if you have the best economic plan, it's not going to get anywhere if you're not out there campaigning for it, building support for it. And my biggest lesson was that you can't stop campaigning. That if you're not winning the support of the doctors in the case of our products, then the doctors aren't saying good things to the investors, and you lose the investors' support. So that was the harshest lesson: is cutting a marketing budget at the wrong time was the biggest mistake I've had in my career. Thank you very much, and for those who are investing in startups, I just want to say that startup companies like ours wouldn't be able to exist and to do the things that we've done, to save the lives that we've saved, without people like you taking a chance. And we all know that financial advisors will tell you, startup investing is risky and maybe you should avoid it altogether. And I would say, instead of avoiding it altogether, dedicate a portion, maybe 10 or 15% of your total portfolio towards startup investing. No doubt it is risky, but it also can be very rewarding. Not only rewarding from the point of view of getting a spectacular return if you do it right, but also rewarding in that those companies absolutely need your investment, and it is extremely valuable. And on behalf of somebody that has needed investors like you, I want to express thank you very much for taking the risk to invest in startups.
Thank you so much for taking the time to share your thoughts and experiences in investing with the SSX community. This has been a presentation of the Startup Stock Exchange SSX EDU Interviews.